Hello and welcome back to what is now week 4 of our Employment Law and Staffing Issues series, which I'm conducting with Graham from Peninsula HR Services. And again, thank you so much for all your queries and your questions, and I'm delighted you're all enjoying this so much and getting so much benefit from it. Our topic today, which we've got so many questions on, is all about training, and I know you've committed a lot in terms of investment of money and time to training your teams. So Graham, today the first question we got on training is, do I have to provide training courses for my employees?
No, I suppose it's the first answer. You don't have to. That being said, if certain employees in various walks of life will need certain basic element entry-level qualifications that they may need to have. So if there are certain services that you're needing them to provide, you need to make sure that they are there and at that level. The onus or obligation isn't necessarily on the employer that you have to provide it, but you need to make sure if they're providing a certain service that they have that minimum qualification as well. So it's a bit of a mix in terms of, you know, taking on a bit of kind of getting a buy-in from both the employee and also then from the employer, realising where their obligations lie, but also then how they want to maybe go from a best practice trying to push forward as well in terms of developing their staff.
Okay. From the work that I do, training is actually, if somebody doesn't want to go on training, it's actually the first indication, the biggest indication that morale is slipping and the person's motivation is gone. So,
that makes sense.
There's all sorts of queries around training. So the next question we got for you is, if I do provide employees with training courses and my employee leaves my company soon after, is there anything I can do because it is such a heavy financial commitment?
Okay, really good question actually, and it comes back to what we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, I suppose, around documentation, policies and procedures. So having a training policy is a really good idea, because that does give you a little bit of a comeback on it. If you don't have anything in place, no, you don't have any comeback on it, unless you've put a training agreement in place with that employee. For example, something along the lines of, you know, we agree to fund this course, or we agree to fund 25%, 75%, whatever that might be, and the employee will fund the rest. But then that there's an obligation that over the next 2 years you will stay committed to our salon, our organisation, whatever it might be, and that if you leave in the intervening time before that, there'll be repayments, you know, due to the organisation, because we will have part fund. But it's getting that in early, getting a training agreement in place, so that you actually have something then that we've agreed. Well, we agreed to fund it on the basis that you're going to stay and we're going to see a return out of it as well. So a return on our investment, I suppose, but it comes back to having an agreement in place. Okay,
so what I like to do is scale it in. So if you leave within 6 months, we're going to charge 100%. If you leave within a year, we charge. Is that feasible? Yeah. Or if you leave within a year, we charge 50% of what we paid for you.
Yes, and I think that's kind of where it is. It comes back to this kind of vague term that comes out from the WRC, which you mentioned before, that has an employer being reasonable, and that will come back to as well as, is the agreement reasonable? So like if somebody has, you know, maybe worked for 18 months or whatever it might be, and all of a sudden we're still looking for 100% of it back, is that reasonable? Probably not. So scaling it in or stepping it up, like you were saying, is possibly the way to go, depending on the course and how big it is, or how big an undertaking it might be. But again, ultimately I'll come back to, I suppose the key thing to remember is, if we don't have something like this in place, well, no, it's not. Then if we've just made that commitment and you've funded it, the employee might go elsewhere and might take those skills elsewhere. But if you have a training agreement in place, that gives you at least some recourse or recall on it.
Okay. I get this question quite a lot when I'm out and about in salons. I want to send people on training courses, it's for their benefit. Why should I pay for them to go on training? And I hear the other side then, staff saying, I really want to do that course, but I work 5 days a week, and now they're asking me to go on a training course day 6 and day 7 at my own expense. I know we're repeating ourselves, but I think...
Yeah, it is difficult, and again, some of it comes back to taking a bigger picture view here. You mentioned yourself about morale, and you know, somebody might be quite happy, but then all of a sudden you're being asked, like, their 7 day a week or 5 day a week turns into a 7, or into next week. It can be difficult, it can be tired, whatever that might be. So sometimes an organisation needs to take that bigger picture look to see, well, look, there is a bit of a long-term investment in this. This is why we're doing it. It's a development for them, but also for ourselves as an organisation. We should see a return on this. And I think there's we deliver a number of different training programs and so on, and there's a quote that we use quite a bit from kind of performance management and development, and it's kind of a discussion between a CFO who's looking at the purse strings and the numbers, and a CEO, and one of the CFO raises this question of, well, what happens if we develop our staff and they leave, and the CEO's response is, well, what happened if we don't and they stay?
Yes.
So there is that kind of look at it where you kind of have to think about, are we going to actually invest and develop our staff? You know, there might be a bit of a financial hit or a time hit or even on rostering to make it work. But sometimes you need to look at it and say, how are we going to set ourselves apart? How are we going to progress? And maybe it will need a little bit of a commitment or investment from the employer side as well. That will then make it that little bit easier to generate the buy-in from the employee as well.
Okay. Now, another question that I get following on from this is, you know, if the training is far away, do I have to pay travel costs? Do I have to pay expenses? Do I have to pay lunch hours? Do I have to pay subsistence? So does an employer have to pay all that or not?
Yeah, again, it would be one, it comes back to kind of an agreement perspective. And if you're doing on a one day, you're at your employer's disposal, you're available for work, but you've been asked to go to this training course, which you've agreed to do. So they should be paid to go to it anyway. A lot of those different courses, there may well be lunch provided and so on, so that will be covered. But other than that, if it's say further than, or if they travel quite a bit to cover it, yes, I would be suggesting you need to cover if there's an expense. They shouldn't necessarily be out of pocket or at additional expense to go to it. But some of that can again come back to, if it's a more longer term program, getting the training agreement in place, and you can just set down an agreement how it's going to work, what the commitment is from both sides. If you're looking at those one day type of programs, generally somebody is available for work, so it's a work activity, you're getting paid to go to it, and lunch things can vary in terms of whether it's going to be included in it or anything like that, and the travel piece, if it's further than what it would normally take them to go to work, or considerably further, you'd be looking at potentially travel expenses also.
And following on from that, if there's a travel, there's a big distance involved, does the employer have to pay for the extra hours, like pay the hourly rate? If say the person only works 9 to 5 and now they have to leave home for travelling to training?
No, you're probably going to be okay once you've covered from once they're going to the course and they're there and you're covering their expenses to get there. That's what you're looking at in terms of that series. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much, Graham.
No problem.
I hope that answers all the questions you were sending in to us today about training. And next week is really interesting, so please keep your questions coming in. We're going to talk about protecting your business and protecting the employer next week, so I know that's really going to be of interest to you. So look forward to seeing you again next week.